Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah, wa alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان فمن شهد منكم الشهر فليصم. Moving much deeper now into this extraordinary time, we reflect on it being the month of the Quran. Ramadan is so much, there are so many features to it, every aspect of the religion is accentuated at this time. And what I want to talk about in this little segment is another of the great lady scholars of the second generation of Islam, the Tabi'iyat, those who knew the Sahaba, the companions of the Holy Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, but had not had the great good fortune and blessing of having seen the Chosen One, salawatullahi wasalamuhu alayhi. And the one that I want to talk about today is a lady called Hujayma bint Huyay. Most Muslims haven't heard of her. But when you give her kunya, which is the patronymic, you get Umm Al-Darda, and everybody who's read any hadith immediately lights up and they say, oh, you know who Umm Al-Darda was, and wasn't she amazing? She is known in particular for her partnership with her husband, Abu Darda. So he's Abu Darda, and she is Al-Darda, and the partnership, really, you could say it was a Quranic marriage, because they were just teaching each other all the time, reminding each other all the time, checking each other's memorization all the time, teaching together wherever they lived. Al-Darda was one of the great preservers of the Holy Quran of her generation. He was from the Ansar, one of the Sahaba, from Bani Khazraj, one of the two great Arab tribes of Medina. And this Ansari, this Khazraji, is known in a number of other contexts which we don't have time to rehearse now. We know, for instance, that he was the spiritual brother of Salman al-Farisi, the famous moment after the Muhajirin reach Medina al-Munawwara, and the Holy Prophet establishes ties of brotherhood between the Muhajirin and the Ansar, and his local brother was Salman al-Farisi, of course, is well known as one of the great spiritual initiates amongst the Sahaba. Abu Darda was we're told he was a businessman, but he fell in love with the Quran and didn't really do much trading after that. He just dedicated himself to learning the Quran, to preserving the Quran, to knowing everything he possibly could about the Quran. Later on, when he becomes the very first Muslim judge, Qadi of Damascus, Omar ibn al-Khattab radiallahu anh, appoints him to this important job. He continues to teach Quran, and we have to this day the famous Damascus readings. They're basically called the Damascus readings because of his presence in the mosque in Damascus. That's where he's buried. His grave is known, and even his students. Most of the subsequent qadis, chief judges of Damascus, were his students, or the students of his students, even people like Sayyid ibn al-Musayyib, and subsequently, for the next 100 years at least. So a kind of dynasty of Quran-oriented qadis is established when he makes his hijrah to Damascus. But the marriage, well, one can get confused because there were two Al-Dardas, because he marries twice. The first lady is called Khayra. She is considered to be a Sahabiya. She is a companion of the Chosen One, alayhi salatu wasalam. She dies, and he marries the second Al-Darda. So they're called the elder and the younger, Umm Al-Darda al-Kubra, Umm Al-Darda al-Sughra. even though there is actually a dispute among some of the hadith scholars as to whether it really was two separate Dardas or whether it's one person. But the dominant view, the correct view, is that it's actually two wives. They're two women called Al-Darda and Hujayma, radiallahu anha, is the second. It seems, though we don't know the details, that she marries him when she's really young. And she memorizes the Quran with his help. The new husband teaches her the Quran. And we get a hint of, what the situation was like in one of the historians who has this charming image, which I'd like to read. كانت أم الدرداء الصغرى يتيمة في حجر أبي الدرداء. Al-Darda, the younger, was an orphan girl in the protection of Abu Darda. تختلف معه في برنس تصلي في صفوف الرجال, and she'd go about with him in his cloak, which presumably means something like he was carrying her. And she would pray in the same line as the men, so she must have been pretty small. وتجلس في حلق القراء تعلم القرآن, and she would sit in the circles of the Quran reciters, instructing them in Quran. That's what the text says. حتى قال لها أبو الدرداء يوما الحقي بصفوف النساء. Until one day, Abu Darda just says to her, pray in the row of the women. So, from a very early age, this great Tabi'iyya is a Quran-oriented person. She also transmits hadith from her husband, Abu Darda, and that's known in some of the isnads, but also from Salman al-Farisi. She studies under Abu Huraira. She studies under Aisha. We saw last time the enormous centrality of Aisha bint Abi Bakr in the circles of hadith in early Islam. And they seem to have had, again, it was another of these marriages amongst the early Muslims that was really strong. So we have, for instance, when her husband Abu Darda was on his deathbed, she says this interesting thing: إنك خطبتني إلى أهلي في الدنيا فأنكحوك وأنا أخطبك إلى نفسك في الآخرة. You went to my family to ask for my hand in marriage, and they gave me to you in marriage, but I am going to you to ask to be your wife in the Akhirah. One of the last things that she says to her husband, which is a touching reminder of their fidelity. So she moves with her husband to Damascus. He's the chief judge, which must have been a busy role, and also teaching the Quran in the new Umayyad mosque, which is still only part of its current dimensions. This is a very early period, of course. We're still in the 7th century. And she has her own circle, halqa, in the Umayyad mosque, which is very widely attended, and probably it's there that she narrates hadith to some of the famous hadith scholars amongst the Tabi'in and the Atba' Tabi'in. Makhul is one of them, very famous hadith narrator. Abu Qilaba, about 5 or 6 others who take their hadith from Al-Darda. In year 81, the historians mentioned that she goes on her Hajj. But basically her life is teaching Quran, teaching hadith. Even the Khulafa of the Bani Umayyah go to the mosque to listen to her classes. And this image of a class given by a woman is quite characteristic of early Islam. It becomes less common later on, even though there are women's madrasas and there are contexts where a male scholar can receive ijazah from a female scholar. Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani's wife, Inas Khatun, had a lot of major male pupils. But in this early period, it was just the normal thing. And of course, the example of Aisha radiallahu anha teaching after her bereavement in the Haram in Medina was the unanswerable example for this. So we have a few anecdotes about what that world was like. Here's one of them. كان عبد الملك ابن مروان جالسا في صخرة بيت المقدس بالمسجد الأقصى once Abdul Malik bin Marwan, who's one of the major Umayyad caliphs, was sitting on the rock of Jerusalem in Al-Aqsa. Wa Umm Al-Darda ma'ahu jalisa, and Al-Darda was sitting with him. حتى إذا قام وقامت تتوكأ على عبد الملك حتى نودي لصلاة المغرب يدخل بها المسجد فتجلس مع النساء ويمضي عبد الملك إلى المقام يصلي بالناس. Now the indication of how things were in those early times in the blessed places of the third of the Haramain. So Al-Darda was sitting with him until when he got up, she got up and she would lean on him. By this time she's really old. She dies at a great age. Until the adhan for the Maghrib prayer is given and they together were going to the mosque. She would sit with the women. Abdul Malik would go and lead the congregation in prayer. And again, there are a lot of these accounts that indicate that present-day Taliban styles of absolute segregation are just not what the Sahaba and the Tabi'in were about, even though modesty, absolute correctness was the order of the day. كان عبد الملك بن مروان كثيرا ما يجلس إلى أم الدرداء بدمشق في مؤخر الجامع الأموي. Abdul Malik bin Marwan used often to go to sit with, keep the company of, to learn from Al-Darda in a particular corner of the Umayyad mosque in Damascus. And then here's the last one that indicates the spiritual nature of her life and her complete disinterest in worldly things. Rawa Maymun bin Mihran, now this is a major hadith scholar of Kufa, one of the great early muhaddithin, anha qalat, so he described her as saying, قال لي أبو الدرداء, she said, Abu Darda, my husband, once said to me, لا تسألي أحدا شيئا, don't ever ask anybody for anything, because the people of dunya and they don't take. The hadith scholars, the Quran scholars, they give, they don't take. فقلت وإن احتجت, and I said, even if I'm in need. قال, and he said, تتبعي الحصادين فانظري ما يسقط منهم فخذيه فاقبطيه ثم اطحنيه وكلي. Go to the fields and follow the people who are gathering the harvest. Look around to see what grain has fallen. Take it up, put it under your arm, and then at home grind it and eat. That again is an example of putting the ascetical view into practice. So what do we find? We find this in her life and her blessed life with her husband in this extreme poverty. Not a kind of nun-like or monk-like withdrawal from the world, but in fact they're right at the center of their society. She's at the center of the academic life. She's crucial for the transmission of hadith and the conveyance of Quran. Her husband is crucial for the law, the functioning of society, because he's the chief justice of the capital, Damascus. But at the same time, they are spending time with the Khalifas. Some of the Umayyad caliphs were known for their interest in wine, women, and song. But this is often a position of the ulama that without taking anything and without relying on rulers in any way, they will spend time with them. Why? Not because they have anything to offer, but in order that those people should not be just cut off completely from religion and from the flow of religion amongst the scholars and the population. And that's difficult to do without being influenced and contaminated, but nonetheless, this was her way. Radiallahu anha. So we hope in this month of the Quran, inshallah, that we will remember the efforts made by the early Muslims in their preservation of the Quran and their love of the Quran, and that we'll have something of that love for the Quran, for its sounds, for its pulses, for its harmonies, for its beauty in our hearts. And that as we listen to the Quran in this blessed month, inshallah, we will have some sense of why it was that they just fell in love with Allah's book and wanted to dedicate their lives not to dunya but to this extraordinary book that has come from heaven. Barakallahu fikum wal afu minkum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.